All right, so welcome back to another podcast. Today I have Hailey Evans. Hailey is an interior designer at Evans Custom Interiors, as well as a coach at Evans Business Coaching. So Hailey, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and how are you doing today?
Good. It's been a busy day. I've already had a couple meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So usually with these kind of podcasts, when I interview people, I ask them where they are in their life today, just to understand kind of a starting point as of today. Like, who are you? What do you do? So maybe you can give a little bit of an explanation or a little bit of details of who you are today and what you do today. Kind
Yeah.
of brief at first.
Sure, sure. Well, I got into the business because I went through a custom home build myself, and it was a miserable experience. And so I didn't have any interior design experience, but I saw the gap where the builder and the customer are not communicating well through
Hmm.
selections process. And so that's actually why I even got in. That was the catalyst that got me into the position now. But I started Evans Custom Interiors about a year ago, and then it's just exploded with growth. And so I'm married. I live in Anderson, South Carolina. I have two adult sons, and one of them is going into the Air Force to fly F-16s, and
Wow.
my older one is in Augusta. He is a licensed builder for commercial and residential. He works for a large commercial firm, so
Hmm.
feeling very
Okay.
blessed.
Yeah, that's great. So, like, knowing where you are today, how did you get here? And if we could start like way back to your middle school, high school days, like,
Yeah.
who were you like back then? Were you very outgoing? Were you shy? Like, what what was Haley like back then in school?
Yeah, so I have one of those weird personality types. I'm an INTJ, which less than 1% of women are that. 1 in 500 are actually that. And so at times I struggled with, making good friends and always wanting to be around people because I am an introvert. But I grew up in Florida. I was born in Miami, lived in Homestead, and then in Naples, Florida until I was a teenager. Only child. My dad has a PhD in plant pathology, and my mother is a CPA, had a master's in finance, and so I'm an only child, and I just was always around adults, and so it allowed me to have more intellectual conversation at a younger age.
Hmm.
So we moved to Montana as a teenager because my folks were originally from there, and their parents were aging and wanted to be close. Um, and I looked forward to that, but it was a very difficult time transition wise for me because it was going into ninth grade, and I lost a lot of my self confidence. Just was feeling very out of place, and I met a boy who changed my life forever, and so that actually helped my self confidence. But I went to high school expecting to graduate a year early because I wanted to get a jump start on college. I just was always very career minded, very wanted to get my education. And so met a boy, and I was ready to graduate. And 1 month before graduation, I found out that I was pregnant.
Hmm.
And so it was a traumatic thing for me because my family was very religious and had these high hopes for me. I was going to go into college and get a master's, and I had all these plans. Um, but at the time, he and I had been dating for 2 years, and we just decided to go ahead and get married. So at 17, we got married, and then I had my first son, Andrew, also at 17. So I put my career, my education on hold so that I could devote my time to my family because I felt like that was the better long-term option, and I knew it was a sacrifice, but it would have been worth it, and it was. So, and then, so
Yeah.
yeah,
So actually, I have a 15-year-old son right now. He's going to turn 16 in May,
yeah,
and my wife and I were going through this kind of stage where now he wants to date, and he likes
yeah.
a girl. Um, what would you say to that, or what is some kind of feedback or advice that you would give somebody at that age as far as dating, whether he should, shouldn't, or if he should, how, and all that kind of stuff?
Gosh, that's a loaded question. Oh my goodness, man, it's tough. I became a single mom, and so I had 2 sons myself. When I became a single mom, they were 11 and 13. I didn't know anything about boys, I mean, I was an only child, and so they went through some dating phases and that kind of thing. I just always expected them to be respectful and to make sure that you are communicating with her family. And something that I told my boys was, I want to make sure that whoever you're dating has a good relationship with her parents, and she loves the Lord first and foremost, and that she has a good relationship with her parents, and just to look at those things that sometimes people miss that could be character flaws, but always just expect the best from them. Thankfully, my son found a wonderful woman. He married, but my older sons kind of struggle. But that's a tough question, to give them guidelines, but still have the autonomy that they can make some choices. So that's a tough one.
Yeah. So you went through high school. You got married basically in high school or just out of high school. Did you go to college right away, or did you take some time off before going to college? What was that like?
Yeah, so we got married, and I had Andrew at 17. I had Alex, my younger one, at 20. And so throughout that time, I did not go to college until they were maybe 2 and 4, something like that. I just started back to community college. At that point, we were living near Seattle, Washington. My husband at the time owned a business, excavating business, and unfortunately, he didn't manage it correctly, and we had to file for bankruptcy this was back in the early 2000s. And that was just a real strain on our marriage. And so during that time, I was just like, I can't control him. He was later diagnosed with bipolar, and so that made a lot of sense to me, but I needed the stability. And so I started back to school expecting that I could, do a little bit here along the way, like 2 or 3 courses, but it just took a long time to even just get the basics out of the way. And still, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do nursing or if I wanted to do administrative type of things. So, that was kind of a tough time. But started there, and then finally ended with 3 degrees later. But I'll wait for you to ask something about that.
Sure. Before that, like during high school, during your transition from high school to kind of adulthood, who were your advisors, or who was giving you kind of advice, or who were you listening to at that time?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I was involved with some small groups at church and youth group, and of course my parents. So, and then I had extended family, aunts and uncles, and so they all spoke into my life. And despite the early pregnancy, I felt a lot of shame and disappointment in myself because I knew that my parents were disappointed in me. And so at that point, though, what are you going to do? I tried to think about the possibility of an abortion, but I called a helpline, and they told me exactly what happens, and I felt guilty even for thinking about that. But yeah, so I had mentors in my life that could speak into me spiritually and just encourage me through that process, and some friends as well. Yeah.
Okay. So you got married at an early age. You had 2 boys, and then you mentioned you had some challenges with your husband's business where you guys had to file a bankruptcy. What was that like, and what was your kind of communication or challenges with your husband, especially around the bankruptcy?
That was devastating, absolutely devastating, because I've always been financially minded and be good with cash flow and budget and everything, but he was working a lot of hours, and so I felt like we were passing ships. So he would leave in the morning before the boys got up, from sleeping, and then he would come home after they were already in bed. So there were so many days that he didn't even connect with them, and so I felt very isolated because I was a stay-at-home mom. But I got involved with a program called MOPS, Mothers of Preschoolers, and so that was a wonderful outlet for me to be able to have some social time, so I didn't feel stuck at home all the time. But that was a very difficult time to go through that, and of course, like with the bipolar diagnosis, a lot of things started to make sense with the decisions that he was making. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like living in that kind of environment at that time? Especially when you said like he was diagnosed with bipolar. What is that like? I guess for people that may be living through it right now and they're just trying to like cope with it and figure out their way.
Yeah. With the bipolar, you have the manic side where he could stay awake for days at a time. But then he would come home and he would just crash and be asleep for days at a time. And so it's just this roller coaster of emotion. And I knew that something wasn't right, but we just didn't really know how to fix it. But after like the third business failure that he had been running, we got him into a physician that knew and tested him and then put him on medication, and that helped. So instead of him going like this, he just kind of went like this. So it was a little bit easier, but it was very challenging, and I felt scared because, as you know, women need security. That's like my number one thing. I need to know that we've got bills to pay and that we've got enough work coming in and a steady schedule. But it was really hard to be married to someone who couldn't provide that for us or our family.
And kind of looking back to high school, I know in high school it's a little bit hard to know what the world is like and how people interact and so on. But do you feel like you could have went back, or if you were to go back, you would have been able to pick up on some of these kind of behaviors and things like that?
Yes. Yeah, I call them character flaws.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. As a teenager, I was naive. I didn't know what I didn't know. He was very charismatic and he was attractive, and we just had that chemical attraction, I guess is what you could say. I mean, it was just very much so. I was not super happy with my home life, and he was also not great, happy with his home life. He was 2.5 years older than me. So yes, I definitely could go back and see where I could have been wiser. I wish that I was, but of course, being young.
What are some of the examples of the behaviors to look out for?
Yeah, so with bipolar, they are very grandiose. Like, they have these big ideas, and they're not afraid to spend a lot of money at one time. It's also, they can be depressed, but then they can be super excited. So it's just like I said, it's a real roller coaster. So it's just those behaviors that aren't quite fitting in, or you would not expect them to be somebody normal. I would say the financial spending, like the money spending, was probably the biggest thing. Like he could go and just blow a lot of money at one time, and that made me very nervous as his wife.
Yeah. So you went through a bunch of, or you mentioned like 3 companies that failed and so on. Like, what happened after that?
Yeah. So in 2003, after he had several companies fail, and one thing I didn't mention, so with the MOPS program, I was 20 years old when I started attending the Mothers of Preschoolers program. Soon I became the actual program leader, and that was a wonderful experience for me to give me that confidence as a leader. But here I am, 20 years old, and I'm over 50 or so women who, some of them were twice my age. And so that was also a challenge because I was so young, but I had young children, but yet, I was communicating with older women that had the same age children as me, so that was a unique experience. But back to the next step after the 2003, we actually went into full-time ministry.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was gifted in golf, and so we moved back to Montana near our families, and we traveled a good bit, and he was a golf trick shot artist.
Okay.
So he would present a gospel message through the trick shot show. And that was very effective in Asia because the men there typically won't go to church, but on a Sunday he would go out on the driving range and perform kind of like a show.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we did for several years, actually.
Okay. So that was like a unique ministry that you both kind of set up or created.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it like afterwards? Like what what was your life after that? Or how long
Yeah,
did that
so
part last?
between 2003 and 2005, we didn't have a really like a home base. We spent 5 months in a discipleship training school through Youth with a Mission in Chico, California, where we did 3 months of lecture training, and then 2 months after that, we went to Fiji to do ministry there. And so that was kind of special because the boys, they were probably 3 and 5, 4 and 6, something like that. They saw all of the work that we were doing and were just really great travelers. And so after that point, we knew that we needed to find a place where he could play golf year round. So we knew somebody in Anderson, South Carolina, and said, hey, we're thinking about maybe relocating. So we came to visit and absolutely loved it. And so in 2005, we moved here to the Anderson area.
Okay. So 2005, that's like 10 years? Not quite, but almost 10 years now. And
No,
what was your...
was
Yeah,
it
go ahead.
17 or so? It's been a lot, yeah.
Or I'm miscounting.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Almost 20 years.
Right. I missed the decade. Okay. So he was like playing more golf, and what were you doing at the time?
Yeah, so I was really struggling with my health. In 2003, before we moved to Montana, I decided to get breast implants. And I felt pressured from my husband, but still, it ultimately was my decision. And my concern was, at that point, you heard that they could cause cancer, or you could have this or that, whatever. But the doctor assured me that they were perfectly healthy. And so I got them in 2003. When we moved here in '05, I was experiencing a lot of autoimmune issues, similar to fibromyalgia, a lot of inflammation and pain going through my body. I saw dozens of doctors. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me because all of my test results were somewhat normal, but nothing could ever be really matched with what my symptoms were. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I did a lot of praying, and it came to me that it was my implants making me sick, because I got them at 24 and I was perfectly healthy. Within 6 months, I started this downward spiral of health issue after health issue. I found a physician in Atlanta who knew and understood the health ramifications. She removed them, sent them to the lab, and they said that there was body fluid within the implant, and so through reverse osmosis, there was fluid coming in and out, and so it literally it was biotoxins coursing through my system.
Wow.
So I got the implants removed, and about 6 months later, all of the pain had resolved. I didn't have any other health issues, so it was really a difficult time. But for 4.5 years, I really struggled with my health, and I felt, once I learned that the implants were causing it, I felt very guilty because, I had missed time with my family, and it put me into a depression, and so that was really a difficult time.
What were you doing? Were you a stay-at-home mom at that time as well?
Still stay-at-home mom. Yep.
Okay.
Hadn't gone back to school yet, although it was always on the back of my mind to have that opportunity. Yeah.
Were you doing anything else, like learning any kind of information as far as like career-wise or anything like that during your stay-at-home mom kind of period of time?
Yeah, I was always thinking about it, and I still was struggling, like, do I want to do clinical, like a nurse, or do I want to do administrative in healthcare? And so I was always researching. I love to read. I love listening to audiobooks, love listening to podcasts. I got that researcher passion, I think, from my father. But I was always learning and trying to figure out, what I wanted my career to be like. Once the boys were back in school and I resolved my health issues, I did go back to college at Greenville Technical College in Greenville, South Carolina, and just started back to the basics and getting all of those prerequisites. It felt like it just took forever. Mm-hmm. And so finally, I guess it was 2010 or 2011, I became a single mom. And I learned that he had been living a double life throughout our whole marriage. Wow. And it was devastating. And so I knew at that point I had to go back to school, because that was the only option that I felt I had to provide a living for my sons.
Mm-hmm. So you ended up being by yourself. Did you get a job? Like what happened at that point?
Yeah, so because it was uncontested infidelity on his part, the judge allowed alimony and for him to, continue paying like the house payment. He had to pay child support. I rented out my room in my home, my bonus room, I only rented to women, but a lot of traveling nurses or students that were coming in for a clinical rotation. So I did that. I also did some babysitting on the side with a neighbor. The most humbling experience, honestly, was applying for food stamps and Medicaid. Because I had never been in that position. I was always the one giving to others, and then at that point in my life, I had to be the receiver, and so that was a really tough time. And so I went back to school, and I was also actually substituting teaching. So I had a lot of things to make it work, and then also my parents were helping me as well. So it took a lot to keep things going, but I knew I wanted to stay in the home with the boys.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was best for them.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the infidelity was going on even before. What were some signs that maybe you didn't even pick up on or you ignored or like what was that like?
Yeah, good question. So, as a Christian wife, I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe him. But when I would see inconsistencies and challenge him on them, like maybe I got something in the mail that said that he had canceled a flight and it was somebody else's name. It was a woman's name. There were things like that, or things that he would be gone for longer than needed, and he was always traveling. And so there were just signs that I knew in the back of my mind I couldn't reconcile, but every time I challenged him, his MO was to deny. And then he might give me a little partial truth, but then I'd find out something else that, he hadn't told me about. And so it just continued to erode away at the trust and the respect that I had once had for him.
And like during that time, you mentioned you were a Christian. Was he a Christian as well? And like what was the reconciliation between being a Christian and kind of not living a Christian life?
Exactly. Yes. So during the divorce, I got us into counseling. So Josh went to counseling on his side, but me and the boys also went to the same counselor. And so the counselor called me one day and said, Hailey, I don't mean to alarm you, but you really need to get to the doctor and get tested for everything. And that was just absolutely devastating me. I was terrified. But it was just one of those times where I had to trust the Lord, and I had peace that everything was going to work out. But it was, those little things that you think or something is wrong, you're probably right. So it's just things like that. Yeah.
Like trusting your intuition.
Yep.
So you got divorced, and what was your life like after that? After the divorce, you mentioned you kind of worked some little things like babysitting or renting out the room. What else happened afterwards?
Yeah, so in 2013, I graduated with an associate's degree in health information management, and that is, I got a certification for medical coding. So I went to work here in Anderson at Patrick B. Harris Psychiatric Hospital. So I started the coding their patients there, which was very interesting. Even though I wasn't on the clinical side, I saw all of the paperwork come through, and I understood again, just how devastating mental illness can be. But back to the other question, so he was actually diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. And so for that level of narcissism, there isn't any help. I mean, they don't think they need help, which is the catalyst of what could change. Even with medication, it wasn't going to change. So he was diagnosed with other things as well, but it finally again started making sense. But it was really hard for me because I felt like the marriage that I thought we had didn't exist. So But anyways, I finished my degree in 2013, and I immediately started on another degree at Coastal Carolina University, which was an online program for health administration, because I wanted to get into the administration side of things with a large hospital. And then I continued on and finally finished an MBA as well. So I earned 3 degrees in 5 years, all debt-free, all through scholarships and grants. So I was very, very blessed to have the opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm. And how did you decide that you wanted to get the 3 degrees, basically? Well, the first 2 were related, right, in medical,
Mm-hmm.
and then the third one is business administration. Like, what were you thinking at the time as far as what your future would be once you have these degrees?
Yeah. So my overall goal was to become a COO of a large healthcare organization. I love operations. I love processes, digging down into figuring out what's going to work best. So I enjoyed the healthcare side of things when I was working at Patrick B. Harris. I didn't necessarily enjoy working for the state. It didn't pay well, and it was just, folks that have been there for 30 years and they're just waiting to retire. And so that was not a good culture fit for me. So, I wanted to go ahead and get an MBA just so that I could be universal and could work in a lot of different environments. And during that time, I actually was in a really bad car accident, and that was another whole thing that set me back. But again, perseverance is what I have done throughout my life to overcome those things.
Mm-hmm. So you got both degrees, and how did going from getting the MBA and becoming an interior designer, like, what was that time frame like?
That was a big time frame. So after I worked for Patrick B. Harris, I was in a bad car accident and I started having migraines for 2 years. And I lost my job. I was not working there. I was actually working at GHS as a contractor. And finally had felt like I'd made it. I had gotten a good job. I was in the middle of my MBA and was rear-ended on the way home from work on the freeway. And so there wasn't a lot of damage to the car, but when my head went forward and back, I hit the left side of my head on the headrest, and that caused nerve damage. So for 2 years, I struggled I couldn't be at the computer for more than a few minutes. I couldn't watch TV. I had to wear sunglasses and earplugs in my own home. I could only drive for 30 minutes at a time. Like, my life went from 100 miles an hour to nothing. I mean, I spent a lot of time in a quiet, dark, cool bedroom, and it was devastating because I thought, Lord, you've brought me so far, and here I am again at a place of weakness. And so finally found a doctor that knew exactly how to help me. 3 surgeries later, they removed the occipital nerve in my head, and the migraine stopped. So I was able to get back to finish my degree, my MBA, and I graduated with that in 2018.
Okay, so yeah, it looked like you had constant challenges in your life that you had to overcome. What, during those times, what kind of got you through each one?
Honestly, it's just that relentless drive to overcome and to succeed despite the challenges. So that was kind of the internal piece for me, but also my faith in the Lord. We were attending church. We go to New Spring, and the boys were real involved in youth groups, so keeping them plugged in was really important to me because they were, of course, at college or high school and experiencing all kinds of other challenges and temptations, but yeah, I think just my faith in the Lord, friends, family, and just the spirit, I think the warrior spirit that I developed to just continue to push on despite the challenges.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you were kind of born with that kind of attitude or spirit, or did you develop it over time? Like being able to persevere and...
Yeah, I think I think a lot of the tenacity that I have, I had that when I was born with it. However, I've had to exercise the perseverance over and over and over, and so that has made me stronger. to overcome those things. So I think it's nature and nurture.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the question basically. Um, so you got your MBA at 20, that was 2018 you said, and were you still working in the medical field at that time, or where did you go from there?
Yeah, so after I finished my MBA, I got a position at ANMed as a patient access manager. So I had 50 staff that I was managing and had two departments, the admitting department and the outpatient registration. Um, it was a very difficult year of my life because I had stepped into basically a mess. The previous director had really just left a mess. So I had to clean it up, and I had not had a ton of experience in the registration piece, and so on the technical side I was weak. However, on the management and the leadership side I was very strong, and
Mm-hmm.
so that was also a challenge of just trying to pick morale up, and the point of service collections was in the tank, and I had to come up with a plan to provide a sales framework for each of my team members, provide the high achievers with rewards, and that actually quadrupled our point of service collections within the first 3 months that I was there. And so just encouraging the staff and building morale, and again, just giving them a framework to work within and some guidance that really boosted our sales.
So your leadership skills, do you feel like you've gotten those from the schooling, the MBA and all of that, or did you get it elsewhere?
I think that's all been through experience. Again, I know they say that, leaders aren't born, they're developed. However, I started having a lot of those, or exercising a lot of those principles even at a young age. I was an only child, and so I was probably a little bossy. I didn't have to share with anybody, and so I was just used to. It was very natural for me to always push to be in the leadership position, no matter where I was. But yes, I think the schooling, and then my time at ANMed, and even just being a mom and making sure that my boys were doing the right thing, and they have become leaders themselves. And so, again, I think it's a nature versus nurture. I think it's both.
Hmm. Did you find yourself like when you didn't have certain information, you were out there researching, reading books, or like how did you acquire new information, new knowledge?
Yes, so I love to read. I love to learn. I will be a lifelong learner. I will never feel that I have arrived at somewhere. I know that there will always be something more that I can learn or that I can do better. So, of course, I had a ton of textbooks that I was having to go through, writing a lot of papers, having to interact with students on the forum. All three of my degrees were virtual online, so that was a wonderful blessing while I was working full time. Um, but yeah, I think that just continuing to lead and find opportunities to make things better. But yeah, researching is just, I love to learn. Yeah.
Hmm. So when you started uh, Evans Custom Interiors, you mentioned you kind of started it because you were building a house. Um, can you provide a little bit more details of how you started and how you built the team around it?
Yeah, yeah. So in 2021, I remarried, and so my husband is actually the CFO at South Regional Healthcare in Greenwood. And so he and I decided to build a home. I had purchased 2 lots in a development back in 2018, just hoping that, I might have an opportunity at some point to build a home, not knowing that, it would be my husband, my future husband. So we started on that process. It was during COVID, and it was kind of like one of those things where, do you go for it or do we wait to see if prices will come back down? Well, we just decided to go for it.
Hmm.
And so it took 17 very long months to go through that building process. It was very frustrating because our builder did not assign a project manager.
Hmm.
And there were just a lot of things falling through the cracks. And so it was, I couldn't stand to watch and look at things not be perfected. And so I decided to contact the subs myself and essentially become the project manager. So I met with the subs on site, and we would go over the plan. I would come back and check on things, and the nice thing is my two sons actually did a lot of the work in our home. So that was fun for maybe 4 or 5 months, and I would come by the house 2 or 3 times a day sometimes to just check on things.
Mm-hmm. And then, so you started doing interior design, but you also built a team around you. So what was that like? Where did you recruit people from?
Yeah.
How did you network to
Yeah.
get the people?
That's a great question. So throughout that process, I realized that there were gaps where I could make improvements. And I'm an entrepreneur spirit, so even though I didn't have any experience, I thought I could make this work. It's a great opportunity. So I started January, February, with this idea. I thought, well, I'll just do like 5 projects this year. I'll just kind of coast, whatever. But my competitive brain just kind of kicked in, and I was like, hey, this is still a really great opportunity. So I started asking around if people knew somebody that was looking for a job. I went to a million networking events. I have developed 2,500 emails in my email list right now, just from continuing to network and become a part of like the Chamber of Commerce, the HBA, all of these areas. And so I have ended up with a team of 10 by the end of last year. And so I have a creative director, I've got an interior designer, I've got an operations director, I've got a marketing specialist, and then I have a few interns that do really great renderings that are in the interior design program. So I've just been really blessed. I think it's important to look at the personalities and see how the dynamic is going to fit within the team. But I've been very blessed because they all get along, they love each other, we work very close together, and so it's been a really positive experience. But I always ask for referrals. I have known 2 previously on my team, and that's all. The others have been new to me, so yeah.
So being an introvert, usually the whatever the word is, like when I'm an introvert as well, so usually introverts are more kind of staying in the background, not really like out there putting themselves out there. Like there's the whole example of if you're in a party, an introvert will be somewhere in the corner, not in the middle of the room, kind of a thing. But being an introvert, how did you put yourself out there to network, to connect with people? Was it hard for you, or was it because you already kind of had experience in managing people and so on? It's like easier now.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you say that, because I thought the same thing, that a lot of people will say that I'm a social butterfly after they've seen me this last year, and I'm like, I'm not really a social butterfly. I mean, I still enjoy time alone. However, I think with the business and the opportunity, it has shifted me to be more comfortable to be out there. And making connections. And I love marketing, I love sales, and so I know that it's a numbers game. I just have to talk to enough people. I get a lot of rejection or no's, but I just keep going to the next. But yeah, it has definitely shifted in me to be a little more outgoing, and it has been a process though, because in the very beginning I was really exhausted from all of the networking and the talking, but it's almost like a muscle, and so it doesn't exhaust me as much as it did in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. So it's something you built up over time.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you have the interior designer kind of business, but now you're kind of branching out into doing some coaching. So what was your thought process in terms of like wanting to do coaching and then transitioning to it?
Yeah. So during this last year and how I scaled so quickly, I was still spending a lot of time with builders, realizing that a lot of them need the support on the backside. So whether it's leadership, marketing, sales, branding, cash flow, those kinds of things, I just, again, recognize an opportunity there. And business is really my heart. I don't necessarily call myself an interior designer. I'm very much more left-brained. I love math and numbers and facts and science and all that kind of stuff. But I just started developing, and some concepts that it's like, I could really help those in the construction industry because I've become very familiar with it. I know their challenges. I know that, builders want to work with their hands. They don't want to deal with all of the details. And so just developing a program that could help them make their life easier. That's really my heart. My mission is to make the builder's life easier.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk a little bit more about the two businesses that you have there. But in terms of like looking back at your life, what were some biggest things that you could take away, like lessons that you've learned?
Yeah. Gosh. I mean, there's a lot, but it even though the teenage pregnancy was not part of my plan, I don't know that I'd go back and change it because it set me on a different path. But I now have this wonderful life, and I have these two boys that are so successful. It'd be really hard for me to say, what would I take away, or what would I regret, or I think it's just the perseverance, just pushing through, just keep pushing, be relentless with your pursuit of your dream and that kind of thing. So I guess I would just really focus on the positive and see those things.
How do you manage challenges today, or how do you, like, if there's an issue, how do you go about solving that issue?
Yeah, I try to listen a lot before speaking. I try to understand the dynamic of what's going on with the team, or when we have a customer that might have different expectations than us. So I think it's really just looking at it from a holistic effect and trying to understand their position and their point of view. I think is very helpful because that helps me develop empathy for what they're experiencing, and then just listening and then coming up with a plan of action that can solve the problem, solve the challenge.
Mm-hmm. And if you were to look now, you're remarried. You were married before. Now you're remarried. Looking at some of the interactions you had with your ex-husband versus what you have with your husband currently, have you yourself changed in how you approach communication or relationship within your marriage?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have. So my husband now is completely opposite of my first husband. We actually have the same exact personality type. So we don't have any conflict. And actually, I didn't have any conflict with my first husband. I try to be a support and to be an encourager, and to meet his needs and in whatever that looks like. But communication is key. I mean, you just need to be honest and open. If there's something bothering him, I know it. I can see it on his face. I try to allow grace and forgiveness as much as possible and not hold on to those things, and just keep short accounts to where if something comes up, you address it, and then, you just keep on going. So.
Mm-hmm. And what about, like, when you were raising your boys, what was that like? What were some challenges that you overcome, and how did you overcome as far as raising boys?
Oh, that was a rough few years, especially when I went through the teenage years and I was still single. My older one is a lot like his dad, and he was driving recklessly as a kid. And one story I'll tell you, he had a friend over one night. They were 16, and I get this banging at the door, this loud bang. I'm like, what is going on? So I go down there, and there was a police officer standing at my door. I'm like, what on earth is going on? And he said, where are the boys that were driving that car? And he pointed to Andrew's friend's car. And I said, they're sleeping here in the living room. He's like, no, they're not. I'm like, excuse me? So anyways, he gets them up and he berates them because apparently they went on a high-speed chase with this police officer. My son had thrown a firecracker out of the window, and the undercover police officer saw it, started chasing him. But he didn't have any lights. So my son's friend who was driving thought it was just somebody that was going to hurt them. That's what they say. So they start driving on dirt roads. They finally get on the freeway, and they're going over 100 miles an hour. So I find all this out, and the other parents have now come to my home. And I asked the police officer, he was threatening to take them and book them. And I said, please do. Like, I don't want my son to have any special treatment. He needs to learn his lesson. Well, the other parents finally talked the police officer out of doing that, and I said, well, then I'll give you his license. You hold on to his license. He's not going to be driving for a very long time. And so he left, and a couple days later I found out that his dad was trying to get his license back so that he could work for him. And he had another excavating company, or a building company, of course. So I went and picked up the license, and I took it to the DMV, and I said, I'm not going to be responsible for my son anymore. I signed that I would be liable, but that is no longer the case. And I turned over the license, and the DMV lady looked at me like, what? That's never happened. And so, I told my son, it's like, there's consequences to your actions, and I'm not going to support you putting your own life in danger and putting other folks in danger. So I was very tough on them when it came to things like that. So I was not going to pull any punches with them, and I think that's really what helped them develop a stronger, the morals and the values and the discipline, the work ethic. So, yeah, just a fun little story.
Yeah, so during that time, your son probably didn't like you very much, right?
No. And his dad wasn't helping either. His dad was manipulating him, and Andrew was blaming me for everything. And so that was a very difficult time. There was about a year of my life where my son and I were really butting heads, and it was so disheartening for me, because when we were a family of 4, there was that constant support. I would support him. He would support me. But then when the divorce happened, my ex-husband got married right away, within a year, and started his own life. And so that became very divisive. And so having the boys go back and forth on the weekends was difficult, because every time they came back on Monday, I had to retrain them, and it took until about Wednesday or Thursday, and then they go back to their dads and have a completely different set of standards in life. So that was a very difficult time.
But over time, your relationship improved with your sons, right? I mean, from just kind of seeing some social media posts and so on, like.
Yes, I'm so blessed. I cannot believe that they turned out so well. Honestly, I think one of my biggest regrets, honestly, is not having more children. I wish that I would have had more children. If I would have known that they were going to turn out as well as they did, I would have pushed on and had more children. But because I had them young, I just was overwhelmed, and I felt like I couldn't handle anymore. But now looking back, I do regret not having more children.
What's it like to be in a blended family? Like, what advice would you give to people who are getting into a blended family or currently are?
Yeah, that's so tough, because you're never going to love their children as much as you love your own. That's a human fact. I mean, and I have a friend who went through a blended family situation, and I saw her really struggle. I mean, she ended up, the relationship she had with her daughters was compromised because she was having to spend a lot of her time and energy on her husband's children. And so when I looked at a lot of the challenges, I told myself, I'm not going to get married until my children are raised and out of the home, just to avoid all of that conflict. But I was dating a gentleman who had 3 sons of his own, and I just thought, I don't know how I can, number one, raise 5 sons, but there was just that constant conflict, because he had a different standard of things and parenting style than I did. So it's a tough one. I mean, I think, again, communication, you've got to get on the same page of how you're going to discipline them. Either be consistently good at it or be consistently bad at it. But whatever you do, be consistent. And get on the same page when it comes to the discipline piece of it.
Yeah, I can imagine it being tough. Yeah. Um, as far as kind of your social life, being an entrepreneur and an introvert, the assumption is that you would have like a limited social life. But what is your social life like? Are you most of the time just working on your business, in your business, and not really going out there, or are you using like your social life for networking and things like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I am more social now than I have ever been in my life. I'm constantly wanting to make connections to turn them into an opportunity with my business. And so, like for instance, yesterday I was in Greenwood for 2 meetings. And again, this morning I had a meeting at my home, and then I've got another one at 1 o'clock this afternoon. And these are all new people that I'm meeting with just to develop those opportunities. They're builders, they're developers, they're, all kinds of people in the building industry. But so I'm very social now, which is very surprising to my family because I've always been very introverted and wanted a lot of quiet time for myself to recharge. But a typical day for me is to have a meeting on the hour every hour. So whether it's Zoom or I'm out, meeting more people, or I'm at an event, I'm constantly making new connections.
Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned a little bit about like going through bankruptcy and so on. What have you learned about wealth management or money management in your life?
Yes, yeah. So I follow Dave Ramsey's principles. My husband and I are actually a leader in our financial ministry team at our church, and we have taught Financial Peace University. I absolutely love his principles, and so that's also what I taught my sons because our school system doesn't teach financial literacy. I mean, they're in math class, but I mean, I don't understand why there is not more of an emphasis on how to manage money, because these kids they have no idea. They go to college, they rack up all this debt, or they get credit cards, and then they look back 5-10 years later and they're still paying for all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that I really try to instill in my children is to be on a budget, figure out what your means are, and live within your means or below your means, and save. And the whole thing about compound interest, I just love it because when I showed them if they put X amount of dollars away every month, then they will retire a millionaire. They will be more than fine when it comes to not worrying about their health or anything when they get older. So I think financial literacy is just one of those big pieces that we're missing in the school system. And if the parents don't teach it, they're not going to learn it.
Yeah. Do you find that a lot of people kind of get stuck on like paying off all the debts, maybe other than the house, and just paying the house off, but not really getting into the investment part? It seems like, I'm assuming, so I don't know if it's true or not, but I'm assuming a lot of people who kind of follow Dave Ramsey will get out of that, but then not necessarily get into investing, because investing, you got to learn more and you got to really know where you're investing, what you're investing in. So do you find that kind of a thing, or like what is your insight from kind of circles you're around?
Yeah, no, so Dave Ramsey, he is very strong about putting, I think it's like 10% away every single month. Maybe it's 15% that you put away every single month in your investments. So you've got mutual funds, they're spread out, and so depending on how much risk you want to take. But he's very good about that, and I think most people understand the concept, but if they don't have somebody that they trust, and years go by without them doing anything, and they have missed out on the best opportunity is to get started early for that compound interest. So, I mean, I know Dave Ramsey teaches a lot about debt and the snowball effect and all of that, and even like insurance and how to get a mortgage and how not to get certain loans out, that kind of thing. But he teaches a lot about investing, and for the most part, I see people wanting to do that.
Yeah. As far as kind of taking care of your body, eating right, exercising, do you have any kind of certain routines that you would recommend for others, or like what is that like in your life?
I do, yeah. So it took me a long time to figure out how to feel good. I have a sweet tooth, and I have always loved sweets my whole life. But about 2 years ago, I started intermittent fasting. So I don't eat from like, say, 7 or 8 p.m. to sometimes I go 1, 2, 3 o'clock, but until I eat anything, because I'm not hungry and I'm so busy with all of my meetings that I forget to eat sometimes. But what that has done is I have reduced the inflammation in my body. I've reduced my appetite. I have way more energy. And I don't crave sweets. So intermittent fasting has been a game changer for me, for sure.
Do you drink coffee?
I don't.
Okay. Have you drank?
I do not like coffee.
Okay.
I do work out 3 times a week in my own home gym. We've got some Nordic track equipment up there. I do a lot of upper body as well. So I drink a pre-workout that's on the natural side, but that's all that I would drink to kind of get me pumped up, and I just do that right before my workout.
Mm-hmm. And as far as food, do you kind of find natural foods and cook a lot, or like what is that like?
Yeah, so I do like to cook. My husband likes to cook too, which is a blessing. So we eat a lot of fruits and vegetables and meat and that kind of thing. I stay away from the carbs and the processed foods as much as possible. Of course, with the holiday season, that's always challenging. But if I start eating badly, or if I start eating too much sweets, I can feel the inflammation in my body. And it just reminds me, it's like that quick little check, like, okay, I'm going to go back to my routine so that I can feel good. So yeah, we do try to eat well. We do go out too, and I usually have a glass of wine or two every evening.
Yeah. And as far as your like routines, do you have any like morning routines or evening or anything like that that helps you to be productive, to kind of stay on schedule and things like that?
Yeah. So I have my alarm set for 8 a.m. every day. I'm a bit of a night owl, and so sometimes I'll stay up late. But my routine, my sleep doctor laughed at me because my routine is to go to bed kind of early. Sometimes I'll fall asleep around 9 or 10. And I wake up every night without fail, usually around 3 in the morning. I get up because if I lay in bed, my mind starts racing and I can't go back to sleep. So I get up, I grab a glass of wine, I come to my computer, I pound out a bunch of emails, schedule them to be sent at 8 a.m. that day so that they don't think I'm crazy, nocturnal at 3 in the morning sending emails. And then I go back to bed in an hour. And I do that every night without fail because it just works for me. So when I saw my sleep doctor the last time, he's like, well, whatever works, you know. I've tried so many things to sleep through the night. I just can't, and so it's okay. It helps me be productive because I don't have the phone ringing. There's no emails coming in. There's no texts. I don't have my team here. We work out at the home. So it's actually a very productive time.
Nice. So tell us a little bit more about the 2 companies that you started.
Yeah,
like as far as the services that you offer and so on.
Yeah, so Evans Custom Interiors, we're a full-service interior design company. We partner with a lot of builders, and a lot of builders are starting to see the wisdom in partnering with us because they can build our pricing into their contract, and their customer is so happy that they're getting to work with a designer. And so then the builder has those marketing pictures at the end of the project because it looks a lot better. Mm-hmm. And so that's really our heart and our mission, is to be a liaison between the builder and the customer. So we do residential, commercial, new build, remodels. And so we are probably in like an hour radius from Anderson. So we're down in Kiwi, or we're up at the Cliffs, we're Greenwood, we're at TR, Spartanburg. So that's the company that I originally started, and I've recently gotten a director of operations that can take over all of the day-to-day stuff because I don't like working in the business. I want to work on the business, and so she is going to be transitioning into all of those day-to-day connections so that I can continue to do marketing and sales to grow both businesses.
And then the second business, you mentioned coaching, and you mentioned a little bit, it sounds like you're getting into like the construction companies that you want to coach for. is that the niche you're driving towards, or are you kind of expanding it out further?
Yeah, so I will work with any company on the marketing piece, but when it comes to like a monthly service, I really do like the niche of construction because it's I can speak that language. But we are available to coach. So I am going to be trained as a certified Business Made Simple coach. I don't know if you've heard of Donald Miller, Story Brand Marketing,
Mm-hmm.
How to Grow Your Small Business. He's just really gifted and talented, and it breaks it down very clearly with communication. So leadership, marketing, sales, cash flow, all of those areas that a lot of construction companies really struggle with. And so my passion really is the marketing piece. So I can look at your website, I can look at your social media, your print material, and say, hey, let's make this better. Let's make you more professional so that you can stand out from competitors.
Yeah. And where can people find you?
Yep, so I am online. Both my businesses are Evans CustomInteriors.com and EvansBusinessCoaching.com. I try to make it easy. And then we're on social media, Facebook for just the Custom Interiors, and Instagram, and then I'm also on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Any kind of final thing you would want to share? Anything else about your life or about business or about anything?
Yeah, I think that having a grateful heart really has kept me focused on the positive things in life. I mean, I've obviously been through a lot of difficult challenges, but I find that people who can see the opportunity despite the challenge and to see that silver lining, those are the ones that truly succeed and don't get stuck feeling sorry for themselves, or their low self-esteem, that kind of thing. I think that just continuing to push forward and seeing those bright opportunities and going for them has been, I guess, my strength.
Yeah, that's great. One last question. What does the world need more of today?
Mm. I think empathy and compassion. I think that everyone, for the most part, is trying to do the best they can. We all have shortcomings. We all have weaknesses that we can't prevent. Sometimes it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, or sometimes it's a physical challenge. But there's also a lot of mental challenges as well. And I think that if we can look at each other through an empathetic viewpoint and understand where they're at first before us coming in to try to come up with a solution, to really truly understand that person's point of view first.
Yeah. Well, Hailey, thank you so much for joining. And maybe in the future we can talk about more details about parts of your business or some kind of topic related to coaching or design or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's been great talking to you and having you on the podcast here.
Thanks so much, Jerry. I appreciate it very much.
Yep. Thank you.